For every amazing brisket out there on social media, there's all the failed attempts the pitmaster didn't want you to see. This video is one of my failed attempts and what you can learn from it so you don't repeat my mistakes. Because at the end of the day, you're spending good money and time on a brisket and you want to do every single thing you can to make sure it turns out awesome. And also, if you guys are cooking on a Masterbuilt electric smoker or a Pit Boss, then stick around to the end of the video because I have some great extra tips that'll help you guys cook an amazing brisket on those units. So let's get to the video. I made a dry brisket today, spent a lot of time on it, probably about a 10-hour cook in total, and it didn't really turn out the way I wanted it to, unfortunately. I have a couple thoughts on why that happened. I'm hoping through this video that by teaching you where I went wrong on this brisket, that you can learn from my mistakes and hopefully not repeat them. So I'll just tilt this down here. Here's the brisket, and it's got a nice bark formation on the outside. It's got a nice crispy crust. It's got good flavor too. I tasted it and it's quite nice. It's got a nice smoke ring, but if you look on the inside, this is the center of the flat. And this was a 7-pound brisket flat, and it's got some juices in it. So you can kind of see if I squish it, it's got some juices coming out, right? But it's not really where I usually want it to be. Here's the other side of it. You know, there's still moisture in there. And the reason there's still moisture in there is because I brined this brisket the night before in a half concentration of salt water brine solution, and then I injected it in the morning before I put it on the Pit Boss 456D. I used some Cosmos Q rub and some Montreal steak spice on the outside. I think where I went wrong is actually the quality of the meat itself. If you can take a look there, you can see that it's pretty lean. This flat muscles are usually pretty lean, but this one in particular is extremely lean, so I was up against a tougher brisket, and that's why I brined it the night before. Usually I don't do that. But if we cut a slice off here, we're going against the grain, and you know, it's still pretty bendy. It's falling apart pretty well. That's a bit thicker than a 1/4 inch cut, but you can see that there's not a lot of moisture left inside. If we cut a thinner cut, it looks pretty good, right? But you can see that not a ton of moisture. So I'm gonna take a look at my notes now and try to figure out what happened to this. I always take detailed notes of my cooks, and in this case, I put it into the Pit Boss 456D at around 10:30 in the morning. And then it got up to about 107 degrees by 12, so an hour and a half later. It got back to, jumped up to 143 degrees Fahrenheit at 3 p.m. And then we got to 4 p.m. It was still holding at around 143. And around 6 p.m., I got to around 155 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was progressing really slowly. I was hoping to hit 165 within the first 4 hours or so, but it was taking a long time. So it clearly stalled out a lot earlier than I thought it would. And then I just kept it going. So I kept it in probably around until 7 p.m. and then I wrapped it at that point. So probably waited a little bit too long to wrap it, and I should have wrapped it when it stalled out at around 145 or even earlier. The problem is, when you do that, you just don't really get a nice bark formation. If bark matters to you, then that's really important, and it does matter to me because I'm trying to get nice bark and nice flavor and moisture in the brisket. If it doesn't matter to you too much, then it doesn't really matter when you pull it and wrap it. So, and then I left it to cook for another 2 hours. Got it up to around 185, left it in for another hour, and got up to 195. And then over the next hour, we crawled up to 203, which is the temperature that I pulled it at. And I put it into a cooler, and then I rested it for 3 hours. So did everything right in terms of hitting the target temperature and the resting period. I brined it, I wrapped it, did all that stuff. But the one thing I didn't do is I didn't wrap it early enough. And I think that's the biggest takeaway, is if you're doing a really tough cut of brisket flat that doesn't have a lot of fat on it, it might be like a really low grade of beef, it's not like USDA prime or higher, then I would go with taking it off of the smoker at a lot lower of a temperature and then wrapping it forego the bark, don't worry about the bark. If you want nice bark, then go for like a really high quality brisket that's like top quality, has a ton of fat on it, has a lot of intramuscular moisture, and it's really thick. In this case, this was a thin brisket, didn't have a lot of fat, didn't have a lot of moisture, so I should have pulled it earlier and wrapped it, and that's probably the key takeaway. Guys, I also have a quick tip. If you're using the Pit Boss 456D, then cook your brisket on the cold side of the Pit Boss, and make sure you're rotating it and flipping it every hour. I've cooked a lot of large cuts of meat on the Pit Boss, and you tend to get like a really hard layer on the bottom that's closest to that hot spot because it cooks a lot faster than the top layer. So especially if you're doing pork butts or brisket, make sure you're flipping it often. It also helps with the bark formation. Also, if you're using a Masterbuilt electric smoker, there's an easy way to fit this long length of brisket, if you have a brisket that's as long as this one, into the Masterbuilt. What you do is you just take one of the racks out and you lean it up against one of the sidewalls, and then you lay the brisket in so it's laying one side facing to the top left and one side to the bottom right, like in this video. And then after about halfway through the cook, or usually about the time you wrap it, it'll have lost so much moisture that it's shrunk and all those muscle tissues have shrunk up. And then you can just lay it down in the smoker normally in the Masterbuilt Electric. So that's a really good tip, so you don't have to mess around with like putting it on top of a can or like some sort of triangular rack that you fashioned in your kitchen, or use one of your wife's turkey roasting racks or something. If you want to watch a video where I did a really good juicy brisket on the Pit Boss 456D, then check this video out right here. That'll tell you everything you need to know. And next time I make a brisket, I'll make sure that I wrap it when it needs to be wrapped, and I'll probably get a higher quality brisket for the next video I do. Thanks a lot, guys. Happy smoking.